This month's episode of Paranormal Heart is brought to you by Nodakian Studios. If you're looking for a beautiful piece of stoneware pottery, check out Nodakian Studios at etsy.com/shop/Nodakian Studios. And also check her out on Facebook at facebook.com/Nodakian Studios, where you can see updates on where she's going to be, as well as giveaways. Go check it out.
Welcome to Paranormal Heart, a place where people can talk about their paranormal experiences. With your host, Kat Ward, along with a special segment, Oddities with John Mallard.
Welcome back, folks, to Paranormal Heart, your monthly paranormal podcast, where you will find new episodes on the last Sunday of each month at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can find Boo and I on Podbean, YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SparkRadioNet.work, Paranormal Radio, as well as IamDarkWaters.com each Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget to show the love and help support the show by clicking that subscribe button, comment and share on YouTube, or follow on Podbean or whatever platform you use to listen to the show. If you have topics you'd like me to discuss or have a guest suggestion, just drop me an email at paranormalheart13@gmail.com. Also, if you had a paranormal experience, you know you're not alone. It really does help to talk about them. So send me a message and we can discuss them, and if you feel comfortable talking about them on the show, I'd love to have you on. I'd like to take a moment to dedicate this episode to David Gutty. You may remember him as my guest in January. Sadly, I found out recently he had passed away a few months ago. David, you were such an amazing guest. I absolutely loved your book. I thank you for being my guest and taking the time to write your experiences and putting them into such a wonderful book. I hope you now have found the answers to the things you and I had discussed. Rest in peace, my friend. Before I get to my next guest, here is this month's Oddities with your favorite, John Mallard. Let's see what weird and wonderful things John has found for us. Over to you, John.
Hey, oddballs. Welcome to this month's Oddities. Strange facts about an odd world that are very, very true. Take out the papers and the trash, or you won't have no spending cash. And when you're finished doing that, check out this month's Oddities, Kat. Man, you want to hear about some weird professions? Well, my job is quite normal compared to this stuff. How about a morning clown? That's right, odd jobs. That's what the oddities are this month. Morning clown, an Irish company called Dead Happy Ireland sends out their morning clowns to wakes and funerals. Yeesh. The clowns make balloon animals, squirt water out of their corsages, stumble toward the open casket, and if they're going to fall in, and fart at inappropriate times. Says founder John Brady, I've been to so many funerals and they're always so sad. Wouldn't it be nice to have something funny happen? The cost is a mere 150 euros, or about 220 bucks, adjusted to about 240 Canadian. Ladies and gentlemen, you could have your own morning clown show up at your funeral. You might want to kill them all with laughter. Here's another odd job for you. Dog poop picker-upper. God. This used to be a job exclusively for neighborhood teenagers who needed to earn a little money. But today, dog paw removal is big business. For example, Poop Patrol in San Diego has a fleet of trucks and workers who specialize with extraction tools. Their motto, we're always on duty. I love it. How about a gross stunt producer? Here's an interesting one. Thinking up new and detestable ways to make reality show contestants and viewers cringe, these people create and sample eyeball soups, maggot slushies, and other foul food. If it can't be kept down, said Fear Factor production assistant Joe Silberman, then perhaps it's not edible. Good God. Good God. How about a gumbuster? When there's something strange stuck to the sole of your shoe, who are you gonna call? Gumbusters! Equipped with a contraption similar to a rug cleaner, Gumbusters will superheat the sticky goo so it can be easily washed and vacuumed off the floor or sidewalk. They're in great demand in most major cities, except in Singapore, where chewing gum is actually illegal. Of course, this would be my dream job as a small child, as, I probably chewed a lot of gum from under tables when I was a baby, and a lot of lead paint, more than likely. But you already knew that from listening to me. A lazy boy chair tester. Sounds like a cushy desk job to me. This job is not quite as easy as it sounds. You can work up quite a sweat, though, after the first hour or two, says Mike Pixley, who rocks back and forth up to 2,800 times per shift at the Lazy Boy factory in Monroe, Michigan. Though he only earns $6 an hour, this motivated self-starter, as his friends refer to him, appreciates the great workout for his calves and abdominal muscles. How about a chicken sexer? These skilled hatchery workers must separate baby chicks from gender. Females will become egg layers. Males are saved for later consumption or breeding purposes, or disposed of. How do the sexers determine gender? Well, first to get them half-hammered and ask them why they crossed the road. Was it for a guy or a gal? No, man. Sometimes by the appearance of the feathers, but most often by squeezing the chick until its anal vent opens up. A little bump means it's a male. Isn't that awesome? And here's the job that I used to have. Professional condom tester. Durex in Australia recruits men of all sizes to try their products and give feedback on comfort and durability. While it's not a paying job, testers receive $60 worth of Durex products, and one lucky guy wins a $1,000 bonus. And for the ladies, there's a job called tampon tester, but we won't get into that until sometime next month when we're back with more oddities. Get that? Next month. Period joke. I tried, okay? I tried. Back to you, Kat.
Thanks, John. My next guest has an interesting background. He has 15 years in sleep disorders and respiratory therapy medicine, treatment, administration, and one-on-one patient care. He has given hospital educational workshops and public formal talks on sleep disorders. He also has a near-death experience that he will share with us. He's a paranormal storyteller and podcaster. You can find his show Chasing the Truth on IamDarkWaters.com. So please help me welcome Shawn Graham. Hey, Shawn, welcome to Paranormal Heart.
Hey, thanks, Kat, for having me on board.
I'm really glad you're able to finally make it. We've had to reschedule how many times now?
A half a dozen times, maybe, yeah. I guess.
If it's not storms, it's technical difficulties.
All right. So, what in the world do you want to talk to me about?
Well, I know you have had near-death experience, and I haven't had that topic on my show yet, and I find that very intriguing, so I thought maybe, if you don't mind, we could talk about that.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I need to preference is actually how I got into the near-death experience. One of the things I did was I set up a bacterial infection in my left leg called necrotizing fasciitis, and or the flesh-eating bug that you hear every once in a while. I've heard about 3 or 4 stories so far this year in national news in the United States about it. And over a course of a week, when I was in a car accident, that was my fault, and I injured my left leg and set up this big, huge hematoma, which is a really deep bruise on my left, right below my left knee. And over a course of a week, it got worse and worse. And as I wound up over that course of a week, I set up sepsis, which is a whole body infection, blood infection from it. And my left leg at the 7th day, which was on November 17th of 2015, when I went into the hospital to have the leg removed, I was in the emergency room, a hospital I had worked at, knew most of the people there, even knew the doctor that actually did surgery on me, knew him for about a decade, give or take. And I said said my piece to everybody that I talked to, my sister and my brother, and the doctor that did the surgery on me said, I'll push some drugs on you that is going to eliminate your ability to make decisions. So who do you want to be your caretaker? And I named my sister, obviously. And next thing I knew, I started feeling sleepy. And I drifted off to sleep, and it was like I got sucked into this black void forever and a day. And I can't tell you after this, time itself was there, but it wasn't. It was just it had some meaning, but then again, it didn't have any meaning like it does here. And I was floating in this black void for, I don't know how long, but it seemed like forever, and then it seemed like it was just a moment of time. And there's so much of this near-death experience that occurred because I was in a coma from that point forward for about 12 days, 11, 12 days, if memory serves. I've been told once, and I never asked again. I need to ask my sister again how many days I was in the coma, but it was almost 2 weeks in the coma. And I had such an extensive near-death experience. But the start of it was really weird. I have not come across anybody that had this particular start to it. Everybody winds up. Well, the most popular thing is the light tunnel, and you get surrounded by all your loved ones and stuff, or a lot of people. That didn't happen to me.
Really?
Yeah. That's the weird thing. I've actually had a lady, Marilyn Hughes, from the Out of Body Foundation. If you're interested in out-of-body near-death experiences, that's one of the things. The other thing that I may need to reach out to is Virginia, the state of Virginia College of Medicine has a near-death department that looks at these. I may reach out to them and may talk to them. I don't know. But the start was I was floating in this void. It's like if you've ever been in a cave and it's really dark, but you still have that surrounding sensation of cool air, hot air, or even hear your voice echo. I can remember being very aware of my surroundings and yelling, but not hearing an echo of my voice or anything like that. There was no other stimuli there other than me being aware that I was awake in this dark void. Then, however long it took, the first stimulus that I had was I saw this big, huge eye open up in front of me. It wasn't attached to a body. It was just like this eye in the dark just opened up. And it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was glowing, but it was illuminating light to a certain extent so I could see it. And the iris, was not a human iris. It was instead of having horizontal, the round oval kind of looking iris, it was a slit that was vertical, like a lizard or a reptile.
A reptile, yeah.
Yeah. It opened up, and I'm like, what in the hell is that?
No kidding.
Yeah. And then it slowly closed, and then I was in that void for a while again, and then that eye opened up and another eye opened up, but it wasn't next to each other. But it was, I liken it to if you've ever seen the third Matrix where Neo goes in to see that guy surrounded by these TV screens all around.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah, you've seen, but I wasn't seeing my life in these TV screens. I was seeing these eyeballs that look reptilian to me. And eventually, those two eyes closed, and it happened again, and then more eyes opened up, and in succession over a course of how long it was. I was surrounded like I was in the middle of this big globe. I was in the middle of this big globe and surrounded 360 in a globe with these eyes open and closing. And then I heard questions like, why did you do this or why did you do that? And I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm in the death process, so why not ask them? Because they were the questions were so specific, like, why did you take your Mustang and do this? You know, I had one of my first cars was a blue Mustang from '72, I think. It was a little 4-cylinder, and one of the first questions was about that Mustang, and I'm like, okay, why not? So I went through this question answers, and it's sort of like a review of my life, but it was like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And I don't know how long that went on, and I was, quite content to answer the questions because, heck, I was dead anyway from my perspective. Then I got to the point where if you've ever watched the movie, I know I'm referencing movies, but it kind of puts it in point. But Sissy Spacek had this movie called Coal Miner's Daughter.
Yes.
Yeah, the scene where the community where I can't remember the character's name was taking the Jeep and running up and down the side of this dirt hill. That was actually a community that's close by, and I have one of my earliest memories was being in that little coal camp community next to a railroad track and that feed store that was in that Coal Miner's Daughter. I remember being personally in that feed store. But just to preference this one thing, one of the questions I was asked was, why did I bend down on a train track and pick up a Coca-Cola bottle top off of a glass bottle? Well, I heard that not heard it, but the question was like mentally transferred. I was like, well, I got really pissed off about it. And I was like, why did you ask me something silly about that? And I started cussing like a sailor and said, is this what the afterlife is? This is what being dead is about. And then all the eyes closed except for two off in the distance. And at that time, I was surrounded by all these eyes, so it was sort of illuminated a little bit, but then it got dark. But then I see this entity attached to these two eyes floating off in the distance in front of this opal. If you've ever seen a car painted in an opal kind of thing, it has that shimmy sheer that changes colors. Yeah. The way you look, the opal had that same thing, but it was always changing colors. It was sort of like somebody was mixing up a paint bucket with this opal paint in it. And it was peering into this opal. And I'm like, okay, what the hell am I? And so I was already ticked off, and I was like, well, now, whatever happens from this point forward, I could either be a spectator or go and find out what the heck's going on. So I went toward, at this point, I still had sense that I had a body. Personally had a body in this experience. So the next thing was in front of it, and I was like, what are you looking at? And this entity never said a thing to me or made any kind of effort to do anything other than move away from me. And I got curious about what this person, or whatever you want to call this entity, it looked kind of grayish, greenish. It had a humanoid look about it, but it did not have the skin of a human. It sort of looked like it was kind of scaly but smooth. And I said, what are you looking at? And it moved away from the opal, like giving me room to look at it. And I started looking at the opal, and I looked inside of it, and there was another person, a male, floating similar to how I was floating, and I could hear this person being questioned similar to the way I was being questioned. And I was like, what the hell is this about? And I didn't get any answer from it. So I got curious about it. And I reached out my right hand and touched the opal. And it was like, the sensation was like putting your hand in a bucket of paint. A warm bucket of paint, that feeling. And I started pulling my hand out, but it was like my hand was being sucked in, or I've thought about this so much, or the opal just surrounded me. And at that point, I left out a whole lot from this point forward to get to past this question and answer scenario, because it's a lot of the question and answers that I endured or answered or went through, doesn't really add to the story other than, it was a bunch of crazy, stupid stuff and poignant stuff, or decisions I made in business and personal life and stuff like that. That doesn't really add to the story. But after I got surrounded with this opal, whatever it was like my senses was overloaded. It was like being in the middle of New York City or a big, huge city, and all you hear is cars and voices and car horns and stuff. It was sort of like that, but it was on a level to the point where it didn't cause me pain, but I couldn't pay attention to anything. It was just bombarded with it. Heat, cold, every sense was lit up that I had. And after a while, I got used to it, and it was like I was in a bright room, and it I got you step out of a dark room and you get hit with a flashlight or something like that, and you can't see just because your eyes are overloaded. It was sort of like that, and then all of a sudden, I see this entity, or a sensus entity, because it changed. My senses changed at that point. From the point where you and I are talking, I can hear you and you can hear me, and vice versa. It wasn't like that anymore. It was like I can see the laptop in front of me. It was like I could see it, I could feel the laptop, I could feel everything around me, and I knew what was behind the things that was in front of me, and knew where everything was all at once. And this entity was in front of me that I came to know as an angel, and the angel had a name, but it wasn't a name that you could speak. It was sort of like if you love someone and you've been around them, like one of your children, and you're alone in a room, and one of your kids walk into the room, and you've got the back to the entrance where they walk into, but you can feel them, and you know they're there. It was like that was this entity's name. And as I've told this story over and over again, I refer to this entity as Bob, which is kind of stupid, but instead of having to say, hey, that entity that doesn't have a name, I just stuck the name to the entity. Now, whether it was a male or female, I have no clue. I don't think sex had any swaying answer there, other than this entity was kind of to the point making me remember what I forgot before I went to live here on Earth. So that's kind of the weird thing about it. I know every time I talk about this, I say weird a lot because the
it is weird.
Yeah, but the sensation and stuff, it was like it was like everything that I could think. It's like I have a mental block right now on a lot of the stuff that happened over in the near-death experience. And at that point, so the near-death experience just barely did start from my perspective. I could feel volumes of Encyclopedia Britannicas, over and over again. It was like I spent lifetimes over there. And one of the things that a few people was keyed on, they asked me about time, my conception of time. And at that point, my conception of time was like the wind. It was there, you could feel it. It could move forward, backwards, spin around, the whole gambit. But it doesn't have the same hold here, It could either go slow or fast, depending on your perspective, but I had control over that perspective. I could reverse time, go forward, go backwards, the whole 9 yards. One of the things that really, that was shared with me was when I was, every question I had to ask. Now, prior to this opal thing that I went through, before that I was being asked questions. After this, I got to ask questions. And I went through the whole thing, but one of the first questions I asked was, where am I? And I said, I got the answer back, well, you're in heaven. I was like, really? And then every little thing, like if I thought about where my grandfather was, at that point my grandfather had been passed 4 years ago. At that point, 4 or 5 years prior to that. And I didn't see my grandfather, but I could feel where he was, and he was content and happy. And all my other family members and that had passed on, friends and whatnot, I knew exactly where they were. I knew where everybody that was living was. I never went back at that point to see where everybody was, but it was like having every answer I wanted answered. And there was some questions I asked that I wish I didn't get the answer for at some times, because it was really one of those brain teasers that that's knowing the answer and going, okay, what does that mean? Because it changed my perspective after I came back of what my place is in this world. What the meaning is of life. Coming back with the full knowledge that God exists, it's not a question. It's not even, if you're believe in God, whatever your religion is, you believe it. That God to me exists more so than the table I'm in front of. I can sit there and peck on the table. God exists more so than that table.
So you went from believing to knowing.
Yeah, it was absolute knowledge. It was just one of those. It was. I went through a lot of turmoil, believing or not believing in God. Prior to this, I even had perspectives of calling myself the atheist at some point in my life, and I'm kind of jumping back and forth in this tale based off of when between the beginning and the end, because I really don't know which came first or which didn't come first.
Yeah.
Which will come first, chicken or egg? It all happened at once, and then again it had some form of procession, and then again it didn't. One of the things that I asked about was hell. I was like, well, what does hell look like at one point in time? And this was when I got part of the answer of all you have to do is realize you're there, and then you're there. And the next thing I knew, I was in hell, but the entity that I call Bob was there beside of me. And it was a dark, grayish kind of void of any kind of semblance of being bright and colorful. It was like rows upon rows of levels of what looked like bodies, but it was kind of like silhouettes. If you've ever seen pictures of the shadow people kind of thing, it wasn't shadows. You could actually see the 3D or feel them. And they are all standing still. And I asked, what are these? I said, well, these are people that are enduring hell. And I was like, really? And then I was instructed to go and share what hell was with some of them. Now, there's two distinct persons that I remember sharing their hell. And one was a lady that it was like being, instead of a third person viewing it like you would view a movie, it was like you jump into their perspective, and she was reliving a thing where she made a decision that cost her child's life. And she got to, she would get to the point where she made a decision and went through the whole gambit of doing the deed that, because of the decision, and her child dies, and she wanted to kill herself, and she got to the point where she wanted to kill herself, and then the whole thing started all over again. but it wasn't to the point where, she started over afresh, but she was well aware that, she was just reliving it. And the whole negative emotions, the guilt, the anger, the hurt was just compiling itself over and over and over again. And I got out of that sensation, and the entity, Bob, that I was with, just said, asked me, what's the difference between you being in hell and this person being in hell? I was like, I don't know. Said this person has no sensation of God existing anymore. For this person, she's without God. And I'm like, okay, it makes sense. I don't want to be in here any longer, but
yeah, don't blame you.
Yeah, but after that, I went through a whole lot of stuff that I remember realizing what God was, or who God is. For whatever reason, Bob took me to this ocean, beachside ocean, and I asked, well, who's God? That was one of the questions, and it took me to this beach, and I picked up this, Bob instructed me to pick up this rock, and I picked up this rock, and Bob said, okay. And this was one of the only times that I remember physically having a hand after I went through that opal. And the rock was in my hand, and I was told, okay, where did the rock come from? And I could feel and see where every atom of this rock came into existence, and then and where the rock was going to go after this. And then I said, okay, so what does this have to do with God? And then Bob said, turn it over and do it again. And for whatever reason, it clicked with me that this was part of God, the rock. And then I looked sort of up toward this entity, and I said, are you God? And the next thing I knew, I was like, the whole sensation of knowing what God is a part of at that point just clicked. And I realized that God was a part of everything I had ever been a part of, even in the point where I was trying to cut God out of my life, cursing God. And that was one of the questions to God once I realized what God was, who God was. And I said, God, why are you allowing me in your presence? And this is one of the things that I remembered when I was talking to another near-death experiencer on the phone. I was discussing with, what brought this up? Our mutual non-fear of death. Why I don't fear death, why she didn't fear death. And I kind of questioned it, and I got hit with this whole sensation of this memory, the whole gambit of feeling belittled and in awe and embarrassed. The whole thing of realizing that the answer that God gave me after I said, why are you allowing me in front of you after trying to cut you out of my life and cursing you in this whole spiel, to kind of compact it a little bit. God told me and showed me each time that I tried to cut him out or God out of my life, how close God was with me. Every time I would say, get away from me, I don't want you in my life, get out of my life, I rebuke you, the whole thing that you are not supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And God was like, you were just a little child, throwing a tantrum. You needed me more then than ever. And it was like God was, literally closer than the skin on the back of my hand. So at that point, I've told it enough now that I just barely tear up now just thinking about it. But when I first remembered it with this lady I was talking to, had not a similar but a near-death experience with horses. But for whatever reason, when it hit me, I started crying on the phone with this lady. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this. Now, there's some aspects that I will go through and remember bits and pieces of my near-death experience, and a lot of it, I still do it to a certain extent now, but I haven't had this sudden burst of, oh, how in the world did I forget that? But that was one of those, well, how in the world did I forget that? Mm-hmm. Why God allowed me back in His presence. And that was one of those awe-inspiring moments that really I think about a lot. I think about my near-death experience every day, multiple times during the day, wondering, well, what in the world's going on? I remember being one of the things that to highlight this experience was my sister was talking about my father had passed on the day that I was released out of the hospital. I was in the hospital for 3 months after my initial amputation. Actually, there was 2 amputations. They did a below the knee amputation, and the following day they did above the knee. And I was unaware of that until I woke up. And but at that point, my sister was saying my dad, he was still alive at the time, would come up, and he'd had series of strokes and heart attacks and stuff, and it kind of robbed him of his ability to physically be able to walk like he used to and talk, and he lost a lot of his language center in his brain, so it was difficult to understand him at times. And my sister said he came up quite often while I was in ICU unit. He actually came up when I was in a long-term care facility at another hospital, addressing my recovery. But when she mentioned that he was in the waiting room, I knew the waiting room, and then I remember being there at the point when my dad asked my sister, "Don't keep anything from me about Shawn." At that time, they were giving my family, for the first 3 or 4 days I was in coma, they were giving me no chance. They said, don't hope for anything, because they were having difficult keeping me alive because I was so sick at the time.
Well, is that with the infection?
Yeah, that was an infection. Yeah. One of the key things that, while you're on life support, they do a lot of things to, give you fluids and nutrition, all this thing. Mm-hmm. And if you're really sick, you got to put what's called a central line, which is in your neck. And they pick a large bore needle and put it in your neck, because that's the biggest vessel they can access to be able to give you the needed drugs and whatnot. And they couldn't even get that in me for a day or two.
Wow.
They just so happened to have a needle in, I think, one of my arms. I can't remember. And they just kept that going for whatever reason. I don't know what it was, but it took a few days, 2 or 3 days. They weren't giving hope for me at all to be alive. But when my sister told me about my dad saying, don't hold anything back from me, don't hide anything back from me, I could remember being there with them for whatever reason. I've thought about this to the point where, I was very, very, I was the sickest I'd ever been, and plus I had all kinds of drugs in me, and kind of wondering, well, could I be, since I was in a coma, could this be some sort of figment of my imagination? And I've done a lot of research on it, and there is a lot of reports and a lot of stuff on it, but says that your brain and your spirit are separate from the infection that you have, that you're enduring while you're in a coma. So I've thought about it, and this whole thing is so real to me. It actually happened. My near-death experience happened to me, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have had near-death experiences that can concur with me that you're separated entirely from your body. Now, I've been with before I had this, where I was a respiratory therapist, I've been with a couple people that had near-death experiences after, or shared it with me after I've resuscitated them. Yeah, one was actually pronounced dead, but I'll get into that later if we've got enough time. But anyway,
Sure.
I remember being there with my father and my sister, and I said, I think I was there with you. And my sister kind of teared up a little bit, and I probably need to talk to her a little bit more before I share a whole lot with this. But it was one of those poignant times when I get this sensation. Before that, I had no recollection of being near around my physical body at that time. And that was the closest I remember being around the body. I wasn't floating above my body or anything like that I remember at all. There was another time that, for whatever reason, I was shown where I was going to be buried. Our family has a couple of plots in this huge graveyard that is my grandfather and my grandmother are now buried there, and my father and my uncle are buried there. And I remember being laid to rest next to my uncle and my father. And my father at the time was still alive, and I'm like, okay. But the weird thing was I had my headstone had rocks on top of it, which at the time I didn't know what it was because I didn't know the Jewish tradition of leaving rocks on headstones. I'm like, well, I'm not Jewish.
Yep.
But
it's not just the Jewish that do that. It's just to let others know and to let the person that you're visiting know that you've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, I was like, well, that's weird. I've never seen, I was never one to pay attention to that sort of thing, but I'm like, why would people leave rocks on my headstone? But the other thing was, my father was buried right next to me, and I'm like, wow. And I went through the whole procession of time of what happens to the area that was buried in, and saw it kempt for a while and then overgrown with trees and forgotten and back and forth. And I don't know why I was shown that, but maybe it was just to show that people actually do remember people, I guess. I don't know. But let's see, the near-death experiences that I am aware of. Let's see. Do you have any questions so far? Or you just want me to ramble on about this?
Oh, you're not rambling. This is totally amazing.
Well, one of the other things that I was being shown by Bob and God was how everything's connected. The whole universe was connected. And that came back to the point where you just got to realize that you're there. And I'm like, okay, sure. And one minute I would, be physically where I was with God, and I could be like at the headstone of my future grave or wherever. And I remember, let's see, I had the thought in my head, and then it just collapsed. Okay, so
when that happens to me, I just say my train of thought went, so my train derailed.
It derailed. Yeah, it just derailed. Let's see. I met so many entities, human and not human, and angels, demons. I actually met the devil. I guess that would derailed off onto this. But how these entities communicated was they allowed to transfer or express their entire life or parts of their life or whatever their experience was to you instantly. And most, I ran into a few entities that didn't want to share much. And then I came in the Satan or devil or whatever you want to call it. It was the darkest thing I've ever been around, ever. And it shared with me some things. but I could sense that it was hiding a lot of things. It was like, I hate to say this because my girlfriend used to be a car salesman. Well, she was over a car dealership to a certain extent. She was the sales manager. And I hate to say this, but it was like talking to a used car salesman. They're trying to sell you something.
Yeah, but they're not going to tell you the bad things.
They're going to tell you all the bad things about it.
Yeah.
But other thing, I could feel, like, hey, I'm really personable. You could grow to like this thing, but you could feel like this sensation, like, I'm going to tear you apart. I want everything that you want, every need. I want everything about you. And one of the departing key things that I think about a lot was when I departed from this entity, or whatever you want to call it, the deepest, darkest entity that I've ever been in front of. This thing said, when you get back, you'll remember what I've shared with you when you need to remember it. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't even think about it, not as often as I do. Today was actually the first time I thought about it in a month or two. But I'm wondering, what in the world did I forget that this thing didn't shared with me and I don't remember now? And that's one. At first I thought, well, when I came back, I'm not scared like I was of the paranormal. I've been around paranormal a lot in my life. And, the house I live in is haunted by no stretch of the imagination. It's definitely haunted. My family actually won't allow the toddlers in our family to go upstairs because the upstairs is haunted by a little old lady.
I remember you telling me that, yeah. Wow.
But one of the key things was I thought, well, maybe that's the reason why I'm not scared of the paranormal, because of my encounter with this devil thing, or whatever you want to call it. And I've thought about it, and I accepted it for a little bit until I remembered my encounter with God and why God allowed me back in God's presence. And then I was like, oh, that's why I'm not afraid of dying or the paranormal or anything like that. So that's one of the things that I was trying to, my live stream that I was doing last night, when I was asking the people that were going on these ghost hunts, what do they do it for? Is it for fun? Is it just curiosity? Do you want to have a rise out of it? What happens when you come back and there's something with you? What do you do? And I actually had a dream about this last night.
Really?
Yeah. And I think I was with Bob last night. Now, my dreams used to be all of nothing but NDE stuff for every day. And then in the last year.
Oh, just to cut you off for a second. Folks, in case you don't know what NDE is, it's near-death experience. So just to let people know. Yep. You can still say NDE. I just want to make sure that they knew what that was. Yeah.
Okay. So back to, I just lost my train of thought again. The near-death experience with
Bob. You were with Bob.
Yeah. Yeah. The dream I had last night was why, I went to bed and I talked over this with one of the guests. Called me back after the show and told me some interesting stories, which I'm not going to share because I said I wasn't going to share with it. But
yep, fair enough.
The question was, why do people go out and try to experience this? And it's like, well, from my perspective, I know the other side exists. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know things float around and visit you and this, that, and the other. I know that without a shadow of doubt. And why do you go out and do this? And I tossed it around in my head and talked about this with my girlfriend Terry several times, but we really got into it last night about it, and I went to bed. I guess that was on my mind, and I got the answer was, well, people were trying to answer that question. Does God exist? Now, to me, God exists. And if they've come to the conclusion God doesn't exist and they're atheist or whatever perspective they are on the flip side of the coin, or no coin at all, from whether they believe it or not, does it, to me, it doesn't matter to go out and hunt ghosts. That it's what do I need to say here? I want to put it out there that, ghosts exist, and spirits exist, and demons exist, and the whole shebang. Mm-hmm. I believe that, but I'm not going to go hunting for them. I'm not going to go, hey, I'm going to go take this EVP meter or this mel meter or whatever, or try to record something. Although I've got a lot of security cameras in my house, and I've caught some stuff on the security cameras, but the security cameras aren't there for catching things. It's like if somebody breaks in or something like that, I'll have some knowledge of what's going on in here with me being, handicapped. Mm-hmm. At least I'll know if I hear something or something's going on outside and I want to know what's going on outside, I don't have to get up to go look for it. All I have to do is just flip over my phone and look. But I'm not looking specifically for stuff. Yeah, that's paranormal, but I've seen a lot of paranormal stuff in here.
Yeah, you showed me some of the footage.
I ain't showed. I haven't even showed Terry most of the footage. I've got over a gig of short videos and stuff of junk that's happened in here. But the one thing that I was plagued for a while when I first started doing this podcast with Chasing the Truth, I started having a lot of upticks in paranormal activity around me. Even like last year, around Halloween, I was in this voice chat room on Discord, and we were telling ghost stories. And I started telling ghost stories, and everybody was asking me, well, tell us another ghost story. So I wound up telling ghost stories for like 3 hours straight.
Wow.
And I actually called in to Heather Wade's show during that night and got on and told a ghost story that wasn't related to the ghost stories I was telling. And went back and started telling ghost stories. But the weird thing was, during this, I felt scratches on the back of the only calf I've got now. And I reached down and I was like, well, what was that? And I pull up, I'm sitting in a wheelchair, which doesn't have any sharp edges, and my hand's bloodied.
Wow.
And I've actually got pictures of of that night. Took a picture of the back of my calf, and it looks like 5 claw marks on the back of my leg. And I actually was talking about I had talked to Dark Waters. I did a couple radio shows with him, and one of the radio shows, he was telling me about a particular demon, and he named a demon on air, and I told the story about it, and I retold that story again on that particular night on Halloween, and all the other paranormal stories that was relating, which was all relative to me. Mm-hmm. I experienced all of those particular stories, and and I wound up with that, and I'm like, well, how in the world did I stop doing this? I know I got started doing this because of my near-death experience, the NDE. Started doing this online stuff to kind of share my perspective of the world and paranormal, or whatever interests me at the time. How do I stop this particular thing? So I started really talking to God about it, and I said, what do I need to do to stop these paranormal upticks? I've had stuff like I had a shelf, a little mini shelf with a picture of Jesus Christ on it that's sitting used to be in my hallway outside my bedroom, that had been nailed up there for over a decade. And one night I was talking to Gary Anderson on his show, and I told ghost stories on his show for 2 hours right before this, I think. Yeah, it was right before this, about a month before the incident I was telling you about. And I looked on what happened was the shelf and the picture fell down on top of this hallway table, and the plate glass on the picture was shattered with the picture of Jesus Christ facing up. I was like, well, if you're that disgusted by picture of Jesus Christ, I'll just leave it there. I left it there for a few days. Didn't even clean up the glass around it. And then I started praying about it. And so I know I need to do this particular podcast, radio show, or whatever. Mm-hmm. What do I need to do do I need to tell, not do something or do something in addition? And then I got this message. I know a lot of people think, well, if you get messages from God, you're crazy. But I got a message from God that said, well, how did you talk to me during a near-death experience? And I was like, oh, okay, I got you. Mm-hmm. So I've changed up how I pray to God to a certain extent, especially when something paranormal's happen. And honestly, after I've done that, I did that particular change in how I pray, a lot of the paranormal stuff that happens, especially after I talk to certain people on my shows, I've talked to a couple people that the paranormal activity in this house just goes way up. And DW, you're one of them, and you know it. But nah, I'm telling the truth, but I'm making fun of it. But anyway,
yeah.
After I change up how I pray, the paranormal activity around here actually has subsided quite a bit. I don't have the things being tossed around, or I still hear occasionally disembodied voices and stuff in the house, and I have not had an encounter with that lady ghost upstairs since last year, actually. So,
you think she's still there, just quiet, or?
No, I think she left. Have you heard the story about me encountering that lady the first time I was in college?
I don't think so.
Okay. I know this is off the topic of near-death experiences, but it kind of dovetails into it a little bit, maybe. Mm-hmm. I was going to college, and I was living here with my grandparents. This used to be my grandparents' house, and this is an old house, like 120 years old. It was owned by the first grocers of the area. The actual footprint of the old grocery store is, literally 40 feet from where I'm sitting now outside.
Oh, nice.
But it was raised down right before my grandparents took ownership of the property. And I remember my grandparents actually did a property swap. They lived right next door. Their property line butted up against the property line of this house, and they kind of swapped the thing. So I've got a lot of knowledge of this house growing up. Mm-hmm. And I remember this little old lady that used to live in this house that was 100 and some years old by the time she passed away. And I remember this little old lady coming out with a little sun bonnet, and a big house coat in the middle of growing season. She would come out several times to check on her son, which was the age of my grandfather at the time, was growing tomatoes or something in the backyard. She'd come out and inspect the garden or something like that. But this little pit is a offshoot of the actual story of who that little lady upstairs was. So one night, I was about 20 some years ago, I was coming home from a clinical in respiratory therapy at a hospital, and it was between midnight and 1 a.m. when I walked to the door, and my bedroom was upstairs. But I usually come home on those nights when I was come home late from wherever. I would try to be as quiet as possible and go upstairs without turning on lights or making noises and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And top of the staircase, there is this picture window, and I was using the lamp light from the street lamps outside to make my way up and go to bed. So I made my way up about the third or fourth step. And I look up at the top of the stairs, and there's this 5-foot lady looking down at me in period garb, a dress that was long all the way down to her ankles, and it was gray, and she had a blouse on with a high collar neck and a cameo pendant around her neck. And she was staring me down like, who are you and what are you doing in my house?
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't one of those you look away and back and she's gone. I'm looking at this lady for a good 45 seconds before I obviously I'm feeling for a switch and going, what in the heck's this thing? And I'm eye locked to this thing, or this little lady looking at me, because she had her hair up in a bun on top of her head, and I could make out most of her expression. On her face, she was like mad, kind of mad looking. Kind of, what are you doing here? I didn't hear anything from her. So I was reaching for the cereal switch, was down at the first step, and I started losing my footing. Before I fell, I looked back, and my hand was just inches away from the actual light switch. Flipped it on, looked upstairs, and the thing was gone.
Jeez.
Now, family members have had encounters with this lady. The last encounter anybody had besides me, was my niece. Came and went upstairs to do something. I can't remember what it was, but she went upstairs to do something. Come back down and said, "Uncle Shawn, there's something upstairs," and it was like this heavy feeling. I was like, "I'm sorry. I'll try to do something about it." And this is before all this stuff happened. Well, it was one of the things why I was praying about what do I need to do to get rid of all this crap that's going on in this house. And we talked about a lot of stuff that happened in the house. My sister was here at the time, my niece and my two great nephews. And they wouldn't allow the nephews upstairs, and they were really adamant about not allowing one of them. He's now almost 5, but he was one of those little spitballs of energy that just wanted to go everywhere and didn't care. He was testing his boundaries, so you could hear him stomping up the stairs and do the quick "I'm sorry" and then go back right at it.
Who was he saying I'm sorry to?
Whoever was scolding him to stop doing whatever he's doing.
No, just wondering, would it be the old lady, or would it be his parents?
It was my niece,
okay.
I think, or my sister. I don't know, but there was a lot of that going on. And my younger great nephew was, he was running through the house hollering SpongeBob, SpongeBob. But the little old lady I've had encounters with several times. The last one was about this time last year. After that, I went upstairs for whatever reason. I think what I went upstairs to do was open the top windows. The heating and cooling in this old house is still based off of oil-based heat.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got air conditioners and window air conditioners, so I've got to go upstairs when it starts getting hot and raise the couple windows upstairs to let the air circulate it down, because it's oppressively hot up there.
I can imagine.
So I boot scooted up there, and at the top of the stairs was this ghost lady, but at the top of the stairs is the old Britannica 1968 edition of Encyclopedia Britannica. And I was like, well, I wonder what they thought about UFOs and ghosts back then in 1968. So I found the volume that had UFOs in it, and then there was like 2 pages, of what UFOs are in this Encyclopedia Britannica, and I was like going, wow, this is cool. And just, regaling myself of what they thought about this particular topic back in 1968. And then I felt something reach toward me and touched my left shoulder, and the whole entire everything went black around me. It was pitch black. It was the middle of the day, about noonish, middle of the day, daylight, and there was, I think mostly clear day, but hot. And the whole thing was like pitch black, like when I referenced the start of my near-death experience, it was pitch black. It was similar to that. And I said, I don't want to be touched. I said that out loud, please do not touch me. And then everything went, the darkness.
You could see again.
Yeah, I could see again. Then this was after my discussion with my niece and sister about what was going on upstairs. And I said, you're scaring a lot of people. You're not scaring me. And I said, we had, I had a discussion, sort of. So I didn't bother you, you didn't bother me, and I was cool with it, but now the kids are involved. This is not cool. You need to go back and this is not your house anymore. Nobody that you know other than her great grandkids are still alive, I think. 2 boys. I said everybody else has passed on. You need to go find them. And then the sensation of her, this entity or whatever you want to call it, left, and I haven't felt it since then. My girlfriend actually is really sensitive to the paranormal too, and she's like, I don't even feel her anymore. And I was like, well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But she the first time she came here, she was one of the she was really spooked of downstairs in the basement, which a lot of activity goes on downstairs even today. I still hear some pecking and stuff going on. I don't really pay attention to it, but I remember opening up the basement door and she peering downstairs, and I don't want to go down there. And I was like, well, there's nothing down there. I don't want to go down there. So if she does hear this, she's going to probably correct me in some of the storytelling points that she's one of the few people that has heard has heard the most about my near-death experience ever, and she asked me to repeat certain stories that she constantly says, well, tell me a new story, and then I'll tell her a new story, and she said, no, I want to hear about this one. I was like, well, y'all just told you that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, you wanted a new one.
So, but I get a lot of storytelling practice around her. So, but
wow.
The little old lady upstairs has not been back. I haven't heard her. At one time, before my near-death experience and having to move back into this house because of my handicap and healing from the handicap, was I used to hear someone sing old hymns, from Southern Baptist hymnal.
Right.
If you ever heard them sing without music, that sing-songy kind of rhythmic cadence that you could hear with somebody. There was a female voice on Sundays when I was going to college and doing clinicals and stuff. I was working ungodly hours and going to school full time. Sundays was my day to sleep in. And so that was one of those great days that you could sleep in. And one day on Sunday, I was sleeping in, and I heard early in the morning, it was probably after church time because nobody was in the house I was aware of. I heard somebody singing, a female singing a hymn. And I thought, well, my grandfather was notorious to have old FM radios all over the house, portable or non-portable or whatever. And I thought, well, he just left one of those things on and had it on a gospel station. I was like, okay, I'll just leave it at that. And I fell asleep listening to this female sing gospel. And I got up, and I heard my grandparents coming back from church, and I was like, and then I smelled KFC chicken. I was like, well, I'm hungry, I might as well get up. So I went downstairs, did my business. I said, hey, Granny, did you turn off that radio that was on? And she's like, there wasn't no radio on in here. And I was like, yeah, one of Papa's radios is on. I was hearing the station or the gospel station. She said, no, I don't hear anything, Shawn. You'll have to ask George, which was my grandfather's name, when he comes in. And he walks in, and I asked him about it, and I said, one of your radios is on, Papa. And he's like, no, I turned all my radios off. And I said, where's that? He had this little radio that was the size of your hand. And I asked him where that was. And I was in the kitchen, and he was between the kitchen and the dining room. And he reached behind the thing like you're pulling a rabbit out of a hat. And he pulled out this radio right behind the wall and said, this? And he said, I said, yeah. I said, no, that's not on. I was like, dang.
So, did they ever hear anything?
I've talked to a lot of. It's one of those things. The discussion about the paranormal activity in this house. I've only had a heart-to-heart with my sister and my niece about it, but I've talked to other people in the family and friends that have visited that. They don't necessarily hear people singing or seeing the little old lady upstairs, but the consensus is there's something upstairs, the little lady thing. I've had discussions with family members that have felt or seen something upstairs quite often, but I don't know. I know it's calmer now than it has ever been, especially since I started living here. I remember one day when I was just had been here for maybe a month. I was in a wheelchair, and I was in this room here that I'm in now as my bedroom, talking to you. And I was next to the Chester doors next to the front door, and I had parked, to sit there. I don't know what I was doing. I was sitting still, and then all of a sudden I feel something push me from behind, almost to the point where I was starting to roll forward. And I was like, what in the heck was that? And I looked back to see if anything was behind me, and there was nothing behind me. And I didn't think anything of it, and I was still, kind of medicated at that point. And said, well, maybe I was just seeing or feeling things. But I can actually remember feeling something push me forward from behind to the point where I was about ready to roll forward. And I had seen one other time another person in this house react to like something pushed them from behind, like their shoulder, and push them forward. And they actually looked at me like, I was sitting across from this person, and looked at me like, did you do that to me? And they kind of looked and said, no, there was no way, because I wasn't close enough to do that to them. Something, I was talking to this person at that time, and this person kind of like somebody from behind took their hand and pushed their left shoulder forward, and while they're sitting on the couch, and it kind of startled the person, and I'm like, nope, it wasn't me.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So,
do you find that you're getting more experiences after your NDE, or did you have them before?
I had them before, but now it's more robust to the experience when I do have them. The last real experience that I had here, I seen a full body apparition that I never seen before in my living room. I was in the kitchen. I could see through my kitchen through the dining room to the living room, a straight shot. And there was this guy standing in the living room with rolled up sleeves, a long shirt, rolled up sleeves, looking at me. And I was, just had turned around to make coffee or something. I looked and I was like, and then glanced and looked back up, and it was gone. I was like, ah. And I started doing a prayer and rebuking whatever it was. And I call that one of those straggler visitors, like somebody walks in and saying, what's going on here?
Yep. Kind
of thing. And I hadn't seen that before, but no. And since, I hadn't seen anything since then. But I still see shadows every once in a while in the house, and then I'll do some prayer work, and boom, it's gone.
Good.
But I've talked to several people about shadow people in this house, or seen shadows in this house that is unexplained. Now, I've seen it quite often. Haven't seen, the last time I seen a shadow thing was maybe a few days ago in the hallway. And kind of, did I see that or didn't I see that?
Yeah. That's how it always is.
Yeah. One day I woke up in bed, and there was this kind of like 4 foot tall shadow thing standing there looking at me in the bed. And I woke up and I wasn't scared of it. I was like, well, I'm going to find out. I said this out loud. I said, I'm going to find out if I can stick a broomstick up your ass. And it took off.
Wow.
It didn't make any noise, but it lunged toward the front door, or the door to my bedroom, and out it went, and I hadn't seen it since. But I hadn't seen anything to that extent since, because I saw it for a few seconds, and I just sort of looked at it, and I raised up and said that to it, and it left. So
a lot of times when you address them that way and show that you're not afraid of them, they're just like, okay, I'm out.
I'm out. Get out of the way. I don't know what it was doing, if it was trying to figure out how loud can I snore while I'm asleep. I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Pinch your nose while you're snoring or something.
You remind me of something funny, but I'm not going to tell that one. But,
okay.
Heck, I'll tell it. If
okay.
Terry gets mad at me for telling this, there was one night she was staying with me, and she woke me up and stuffed Gas-X pills in me. She said, "Here, take this." And I was like, "What is it?" It's the Gas-X pills. You're killing me.
That's awesome.
Terry, I'm sorry, but I had to say
it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, do you know an hour has gone by, Shawn?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
So,
yeah.
I know. So I would absolutely love to have you back at some point because I know you still have a lot in you to tell. But
yeah, if I start getting into telling stories, I can tell them until somebody says, "Shut up, Shawn."
Shut up, Shawn.
Okay.
So before we go, why don't you tell us about your show?
My show is called Chasing the Truth, from the normal to the paranormal, meaning it doesn't have to be a paranormal topic. It can be just about any topic. Mm-hmm. Totally. I've been doing some live shows that are open lines here lately because my guests have, you've experienced this. Your guests kind of fall out or whatever pops open. So I've been doing some open line stuff. And I've had some interesting guests call in, tell some crazy stories. That
last week. Oh, that woman, I loved her. Yeah,
she was. She actually was on that for about an hour and a half, I think. Yeah, she was just one of those people that you start listening to her story, and you're like, yeah, you got plenty of stories. Let's keep on going. But it's fantastic. It's part of the Dark Waters Radio Network, which your show's on the Dark Waters Radio Network.
Yep.
And I started plus on the Paranormal Radio app. You just go and click on if you're on the browser, it's on the Paranormal Radio side of things on the TalkStream, or was it TalkStreamLive.com?
I can't remember.
But if you download the Paranormal Radio app, go to Dark Waters Radio channel, and I'll be there Saturday nights at 7 p.m. Central Time, and I'm on repeats, same time, every day of the week, except for Saturdays, because your show pops in. Yeah. Saturdays I'm live, and Sundays I'm not on there because the show roundup or lineup changes with you, and then the real deals on Sundays. Yeah. So, but the other thing is I'm on UPRN 107.7 FM out of New Orleans, and there's also iHeartRadio with UPRN on iHeartRadio too, same time, live. And hopefully from now on I'll be live every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Central Time unless something happens.
Yeah, that'll be nice. Yeah. And you're also on IamDarkWaters.com. Can't forget that one.
Yeah, IamDarkWaters.com. My repository is actually there. Of old shows is right there. And if you can't find where to listen to my show or your show, you can go to IamDarkWaters.com, and there's actually a little browser player on there. You just click on there, and you can listen to the current live feed of what's playing on I Am Dark Waters.
Nice.
So that's it. But if you want to get in touch with me, go just send me an email, Shawn, SHAWNG, all one word, at IamDarkWaters.com, and it'll go directly to my inbox. Or you can call me directly at 931-994-6917. Or if you like doing Skype, it's Chasing the Truth 2018. You can either send me a text message that way, or however you want to do it. That's fine. I love listening to the folks that hopefully I've got growing listeners. So if you want to share a story with me that I can share or bring you on live, on the nights I'll go live, just call me. That's why I'm looking for anybody's experience. I want to share everybody's experience that they want to share. That's part of my prerogative with the show lineup.
Yeah, and it's not just ghosts; it's cryptids as well, and UFOs. You talk about it all.
Yeah, I don't think other than taboo subjects or something like that. But I talk about anything and everything. Yep. I may do a conspiracy show in the near future. I don't know. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but the FBI just came out with conspiracy theorists, they're highly looking at these people for whatever reason nationally. For the United States. I've read a couple of stories on it. I was like, really?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But I'm not a QAnon person. If you ever heard of QAnon, I tried to follow them for a little bit, and then I was like, you have to eat, drink, and sleep the subject matter that QAnon talks about. And I'm like, I can't put that much effort into that. I'm too interested in everything around me and micromanage my attention to talk or even follow along what QAnon is following along. Now, I know folks that do. God bless them for it, but I just don't have the attention span for that subject matter.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. But
well, I'll be adding the links on the show notes for the show. And folks, if you're not quite sure how to get in touch with Shawn, you can always send me an email as well at paranormalheart13@gmail.com. And I can send the message to him and get you two acquainted so you guys can chat.
Yeah. If you want me on your show, just let me know. If you're a podcast person or radio show host or whatever, if you want me to come on your podcast or radio show or whatever and tell stories, I can certainly do that.
Nice. Okay, well, thank you so much, Shawn. This was so intriguing.
Well, I hope to talk to you again if you want to do another near-death experience show, or if you want me to do another paranormal show or whatever. I don't care. I'll talk.
Yeah. Nice.
Just give me some coffee, and I'll talk to you as long as the coffee holds out.
I call coffee the sweet ambrosia.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks again, Shawn.
Well, thank you, Kat.
We'll stay in touch.
All right.
Take care.
Well, we've made it to the end of another episode. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, take care of each other. And if you'd like to be on the show or have questions and comments, just drop me an email, paranormalheart13@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Paranormal Heart would like to extend a special thank you to PurplePlanet.com for supplying the music for the show. The views and opinions expressed on Paranormal Heart are those of the host and participants.